Before we officially launch, there's two technical issues, two housekeeping notes for you. First, we provide simultaneous translation. You can choose either English or Vietnamese. You can see on the lower bar, there's a globe symbol, which entitled interpretation. You can choose either English or Vietnamese. Another housekeeping note is that we will have a Q&A session, the question and answer. You can also send us your question in advance via the chat box, and then we will get back to you. We will collect the question and get back to you. So just two notes. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to start today's webinar. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished, I'm Nguyễn Văn Tuấn from Hanoi University of Civil Engineering, and also the director of CCSB-VN, the Competence Center of Sustainable Building. First, we are pleased to welcome you all to the second webinar of the HOPE project, with the title Health Governance to Promote Inclusive Urban Planning Approaches Targeting the Quality of Life for Vietnamese Citizens. Building on the success of the first webinar focusing on policy and practice to connect infrastructure users for healthy life in Vietnamese cities. This second webinar is the second amongst a series of four, which targets healthy lives and urban green planning in Vietnam. This is a cooperation project between CAS, CCSB-VN from Husay, and the Hamburg University, Germany. We officially run from 14 to 16:30. Could you please show my PPT? I want to show you a bit of the agenda. Well, as you can see on the slide, there will be three parts. First, we will have the opening remarks, and then we will have three speeches. Then we will have the Q&A session, where we invite our speakers as well as urban managers in Vietnam to share their perspectives. And you can look at the slide to see the agenda. Now, may I invite you to the opening sessions, and allow me to introduce to you the distinguished guests. First, Madam Vũ Thị Thu Phương, project manager who represent the KAS in Vietnam. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Michael Weber, senior technical advisor of HOPE project from Hamburg University. And third, Professor Robert Lawrence from the Geneva University of Switzerland. He's also members of the Council of Advisors at the Swiss Academy of Social Sciences. I'm pleased to introduce Madame Vũ Thị Vinh, former secretary of ACVN, Professor Phạm Quý Lan, former deputy director of Vietnam Institute of Architecture, and Dr. Nguyễn Thu Thủy, a technical advisor of the HOPE project from Hamburg University, who will also coordinate the Q&A session. Dr. Tạ Quốc Thắng, secretary of the Vietnamese Commission to monitor architectural forms in Vietnam and the ASEAN. Mr. Lê Sĩ Chiến, vice chairman of the People's Committee of the City of Vinh. Mr. Trần Trung Quân and Mr. Nguyễn Xuân Tùng from the Office of Urban Management of Vinh University, and Dr. Phạm Hải Hà from Hanoi University of Civil Engineering. I will also have Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dĩnh, Director of International Relations of HUSE. We also have manager, experts, scholar, practitioners, and representatives from different institutions, enterprises, and state agencies. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. Now, may I invite Madam Vũ Thị Thu Phương, Program Manager of CAS, for the opening remark. My thanks to the chair. On behalf of CAS Vietnam, I wish to extend our warm greetings to you, to the speakers, to the participants, and to everyone who enjoyed us in the Q&A session. CAS warmly welcomes you to this webinar. We thank you for your time. At the moment, I think we have roughly 140 participants, which is a sign showing us that this topic still receives substantial attention from the public and the academic circle. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say a few words about CAS. I think for many of you, as you can see in my back, this is the logo of the organization. CAS is a German political foundation which has been in operation in Vietnam for almost 30 years. As a political foundation, our main focus is on foreign security and international relations. In Vietnam, we have many important partners, for example, ministries of foreign affairs. We also work in the field of enhancing citizens' participation, democracy, rule of law. We work with the National Assembly and MOJ. In recent years, in line with global trends, the CAS globally and also in Vietnam also focus on innovation. And since 2021, we launched a series of operation activities focusing on innovation. And in 2022, HUSE is our latest partner, and the field of cooperation that we work with HUSE is part of our pillar on innovation on a global scale and also in Vietnam. I should say that regarding the topic of today's webinar, 3 years ago, CAS in Vietnam had a comprehensive project in collaboration with Vietnam Association of Cities, ACVN. We conducted research and studies and surveys to understand models of successful models of urban governance in Vietnam. And today we actually back to this topic, and we are pleased to have Professor Vũ Thị Vinh with us this time, and we hope that Professor Vinh can share with us something about the involvement of CAS in the field of urban governance and green growth and green building in Vietnam. I say this in order to explain why we emphasize this field so much. CAS Vietnam has worked with HUSE for a project that will last 3 years, focusing on health-oriented policies and sustainable building practices to promote well-being in urban life in Vietnam. The reason we choose to work with Hussein is based on our observation of rapid urban development in Vietnam. This is not what we can see in Hanoi and other major cities, but as our representative mentions, he made a comparison 13 years ago. He went to Vietnam and now he returned to Vietnam and he noticed a very rapid urbanization. The problem with urbanization is that in addition to the sense of modernity and amenities and convenience, we also note many problems affecting our daily lives because of rapid urbanization. For example, the cramped space of Hanoi, too many concrete buildings, low air qualities, noise pollution, traffic jam, and air quality warnings every morning. So we think that no matter how developed our society is, but if we have to face many risks regarding the urban environment whenever we step out of our home, and then we do have some problems to deal with, which we need to pay attention to in order to find a solution. So today, as the sponsoring partner, we're pleased to welcome our speakers both in Vietnam, but also from abroad. We welcome Professor Lawrence once again. Thank you for coming back to us. And I hope that in today's webinar, we will be able to learn from your experiences and also the lessons, what has been done in other developed countries. We also want to hear Vietnamese speakers sharing what has been achieved in Vietnam and what should be done in terms of policies, of human resources, in terms of how we should transform the urban governance towards green green cities. So I won't talk too much on technical issue or because I do not have the professional expertise. Allow me to conclude here, and I hope that in today's webinar we will be able to receive your active comments and recommendations. In the first webinar, we received lots of useful comments and feedback, and today we look forward to even more active contribution. And just for your information, in 2020, we will have a total of 4 webinars, which means that 2 more webinars will come, which will deal with other issues concerning urban governance. We will have another on assessing the life cycle of building materials, and the third will be on designing green build forms. So I look forward to your participation today and in future webinars. My thanks to Madame Thu Phương, who has been very committed to this project. And we wish also to thank CAS for sponsoring our webinars, as well as this project and CCSB-VN. Now, may I invite Dr. Michael Wable, Senior Technical Advisor of the HOPE project, to deliver the opening remark. Dr. Wable, please. Dr. Michael Wable, please.
Hello, do you hear me?
Let's go ahead.
don't see myself right now. So do you see me? I don't see myself at the video. Okay, I cannot see myself. Thank you. So I'm very glad to give a short opening remark from my side as Senior Technical Advisor. At the moment, actually, I'm in Poland, in Katowice, at the World Urban Forum that's organized by UN Habitat. It's the world's biggest event with more than 14,000 participants. It's a huge event with a lot of stakeholders dealing with sustainable urban transformation and also with the aspect of health. So, for example, a WHO, World Health Organization, and particularly UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, are doing a lot of activities in this field. And I thought when we developed this activity that it's very important to combine the dimension of health with the dimension of urban sustainability. So we are very glad and thankful that Konrad Adenauer Foundation supported our 3-year project called HOPE, Health-Oriented Policies and Sustainable Building Practices to Promote Well-Being and Urban Green Infrastructure in Vietnam. And we do this because we think a good quality of urban life is really essential for a healthy living environment, but how to implement that is a very big challenge. So this activity aims to build up cross-cutting and comprehensive basic, we call it action knowledge, and this will be done in the first year of the funding by this webinar series. Please switch to the next slide. We have, as Ms. Huang already mentioned, please switch to the next slide. Yeah. 4 webinars. The first took place on 20th of April. You see a photo on the right side. We have today a webinar focusing on the issue of health governance. So which kind of stakeholder relations, stakeholder settings are needed to achieve this kind of implementation, to overcome implementation gaps, to create this action knowledge. Then we will have a webinar next time dealing with more questions of building design and neighborhood development, sustainable neighborhood development from the perspective of architects and urban planners. And last but not least, we have a webinar dealing more with building materials and the big issue of life cycle assessment, which is also a big issue here at World Urban Forum in Katowice. All this is organized. Maybe you switch to the next slide. You can switch to the next slide. Do you hear me? You can hear me? Okay, all this is okay. All this is organized by a new institution set up at the Hanoi University of Civil Engineering called Competence Center for Sustainable Building in Vietnam. This is a spin-off from another project funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research. And by means of this competence center, we want to bundle expertise not only from the science, but also from the corporate sector and civil society sector to build up the sustainable building action knowledge. So CCSB-VN aims to be some kind of science society interface to transfer this knowledge to diverse areas of scientific application and to the general public. So we are a cross-cutting institution, overcoming this kind of prevalent silo confinement, silo mentalities, and to bring together this comprehensive knowledge to the ground. And the final vision of this Competence Center for Sustainable Building in Vietnam is to develop it as Vietnam's leading think and do tank in terms of sustainable building. So again, we are very grateful to Konrad Adenauer Foundation that the HOPE project is the kickoff for the CCSB-VN, and we hope that many more activities will fill this Competence Center for Sustainable Building Vietnam with life. So thanks a lot for your attention from my side, and I'm very much looking forward to the keynote presentation following after my input. Thanks so much.
My thanks to Dr. Michael Wabel. I see that you are very happy that your initiative has been materialized through the establishment and operation of CCSB-VN as an interface to connect state managers and scholars in Vietnam. I thank you very much, Michael. Now we have finished the opening session, and now let's move straight to the presentations. First, allow me to introduce the first presentation, Progressive Urban Governance for Healthier Cities, by Professor Roderick Lawrence. Professor Lawrence served many senior teaching and research positions. He has been an honorary professor in University of Geneva in Switzerland. He's an expert on community health and community life and sustainable development. He has published more than 200 publications on new solutions to improve urban life and citizens' health in our changing world. And let's listen to his presentation right now. Professor Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Welcome to this keynote presentation, which I've titled Progressive Urban Governance for Healthier Cities. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me back to present some of my ideas about the difference between government and governance, and how both government and governance need to work together collaboratively to promote urban planning for the health and well-being of the citizens in the city. Could we have the next slide, please? So the content of my presentation today will be, first of all, some introductory remarks, clarifying this distinction between government and governance. And then I'll be talking about core principles of healthy cities and why the health and well-being of citizens living in urban areas extends well beyond the biomedical model of health, as we mentioned in the previous webinar. I will then refer specifically to the WHO Healthy Cities Project, which was launched in 1986. So after 35 years of experience working with the promotion of health and sustainable development in cities around the world, we have learned a lot. And one of the key messages are the 11 core characteristics of healthy cities, which need to be understood if we are to use urban planning as a means of promoting health and quality of life in cities. And I'm referring to specifically to the theme of mobility. And I will make the distinction between transport and mobility. Mobility being a much broader and more inclusive concept than transport. And I will use the case of examples from Singapore, Seoul, and Stockholm to illustrate three different approaches to urban governance and how they have been used to promote health and quality of life in these three very different cities. And finally, you'll have some key references if you want to read more about what I'm saying in the very short time available today. So what is urban governance? Let's begin here. Governance is a buzzword and it's used by lots of people, but let's try and make this simple and say governance is different from government. Government is talking about the political officials, the public administrative authorities that are in charge of public affairs at the national level or at the local city level. And governance is the relationship between these state organizations, the policies and that are developed by the state organizations have to be implemented. And the governance is about the how. How do we shift from the policy definition by government and implement it effectively? And of course, that's a key challenge. I've put here an interesting slide from Milan, Italy, which I took, showing that governance here in terms of redeveloping part of Milan city involves issues about mobility and access for cycling and walking, and that's very much a public responsibility. But these incredibly interesting sustainable tower blocks in the background are a private sector responsibility. And so you've got actors and institutions working together. And that's why I'm suggesting to you that urban governance requires combining multiple types of knowledge and professional know-how. We're talking about the inter and transdisciplinary approaches that we explained in webinar 1. But we also need political endorsement. And at the city level, that means the local authorities, and in particular the mayor, must adhere to this goal of promoting health and sustainable development in the city. But we also need public adhesion. Governance doesn't mean a top-down approach. It means bringing on board those people from the public sector, non-government organizations, and community groups to achieve this objective of promoting health and sustainable development. And above all, political leadership. I think all of the examples that I've examined show that political leadership is fundamental. And last but not least, individual and collective responsibilities. At the individual level, the household level, the community level, we all have a responsibility to ourselves and to others in promoting health and quality of life in cities. The next slide, please. So the WHO Healthy Cities Project, which was launched in 1986, is an interesting example of combining local government and government in cities. And although it's talking about health, we will see in a moment that it involves many other dimensions of urban development and urban life. Now, the Healthy Cities Project, during its 35 years of existence, has developed core themes that have been applied in 5-year phases. And some of the core themes that are of interest to us are health and aging. We're all living in aging societies, including Vietnam. So how are we going to define policies and implement for the elderly citizens in our cities? The second thing, which I find extremely interesting, is the whole question of social life and community activity. And this involves physical activity in public spaces. So we're moving from active living to involve health promoting activity, which is good for health and quality of life. And that's a shift from sedentarism. We've become far more sedentary as we've become urbanized, and we need to change that. And last but not least, promoting health by urban planning, which is a fundamental objective of the Healthy Cities Project, and it ties in extremely well with the objectives of HOPE. And today I'll be using the transdisciplinary concept of mobility, not health, not transport, in order to explain how we can actually achieve these very ambitious objectives. And I want to say that we have to learn from the experience, and lessons are being learned. There are many interesting examples showing that cities are innovative and can implement change. The next slide, please. So the research over the 35-year period of the Healthy Cities project with WHO has showed that planning for healthy cities involves many, many aspects beyond the health and medical sector, including a clean, safe physical environment, including affordable and available housing. Now, we saw in webinar 1 that 25% of all factors that impact on health are in fact environmental factors. We also need an ecosystem that is stable now and sustainable in the long term. And this becomes an important challenge, not only with respect to climate change, but also extreme weather events. And we've just had a report this week talking about the number of cities in the world which will be prone to flash flooding, not just sea level rise, with these incidents of climate change. The third characteristic is a strong, mutually supportive and non-exploitive community. So here we're talking about ethical and moral interventions. We're talking about how do we reduce inequalities and promote access to health services, to education, to housing, to healthy food, for all groups of people living in Hanoi or any other city in the world. And the fourth characteristic is public participation, and how the public should be involved is in decisions that affect their lives. And increasingly this is happening with community-based initiatives and sometimes non-government organizations being active players in urban planning for health and quality of life in our cities. But we can't forget that we need to meet basic needs of food, water, shelter, income, safety, and indeed employment for all people in the city. We have to have an inclusive policy agenda that it gives particular attention to those in most need, because that was one of the key principles of the Sustainable Development definition that was endorsed in 1992 in the Rio conference. We need a wide variety of experiences and resources with multiple contacts, interactions, and communication. And this deals with the social environment of the city. The city is there for people, and how we bring them together in public spaces, in communal spaces, is fundamentally important. We find regarding the aging populations of citizens in cities around the world that they become in need of more social interaction as they become isolated in their homes. The next slide, please. So the seventh is a diverse, vital, and innovative economy. And so when we're talking about healthy cities, this model on the right shows that we're talking about not just an economy, but also a stable ecosystem and human wealth. So we are enlarging the notion of the green economy to include health and well-being. The eighth is understanding the cultural and biological heritage of the city, and particularly the landmarks in the city, which are very important for group and population identity. The ninth is the morphology of the city, the built form of the city, and how modern urban planning has radically changed the built form of city, and it has not always been for the betterment of health and quality of life of citizens, as we will see. And we're talking about access to public health and care for those in need, so that services should be accessible to all. They must be affordable, and this should be a public policy objective. And last but not least, if we think about adding up the 10 previous characteristics of cities, we find that the outcome should be higher health status, both positive health status and lower incidence of disease. The next slide, please. Now, I'm using the case of mobility because, as I said before, it's a more global concept than transport. Transport often evokes civil engineering, road traffic engineering, and large-scale infrastructure. But mobility is intersectorial. It's talking about active living. It's talking about how we need to have physical activity to ensure our health and well-being of our biological metabolism. And so when we're talking about mobility, we're talking about shifting from the public policy agenda, which promoted infrastructure for private road vehicles on motorways and streets in cities. And that was the modernity agenda in urban planning in the 20th century. And we need to shift to one which is talking about multiple types of moving from different parts of the city to other parts of the city, including public transport, cycling, walking, and not relying only on the motor car. Of course, if you haven't got a good public transport system, then people have to use a car if they want to travel long distances. Now, one of the arguments in making the shift from transport to mobility is this concept of co-benefits that we talked about in webinar 1. And co-benefits means that if we're shifting from a whole emphasis on promoting road infrastructure and transport by vehicles to multiple types of mobility, as I just mentioned, then we can talk about the environmental benefits, for example, lower air pollution from road traffic, lower noise nuisance from road traffic. We can talk about lower energy consumption and the economic gain. We can talk about increasing social contact in streets, and we can talk about the possibility of more public green space. And all of these added together improve health and quality of life for those living in cities. So we're talking about the environmental, economic, social, biological, and health benefits of planning for mobility in cities that shifts from road transport to multiple types of movement in the city. The next slide, please. So one way that this can be achieved in terms of urban governance, and it has been tested, is using this model called the Deep Seer model, which we have revised in our research in Geneva. And the Deep Seer model is talking about what are the driving forces that are impacting on increased transport and mobility in cities. What pressures do those driving forces create? And indeed, what are the state or conditions as a result of that? Who are exposed to the negative consequences of increased transport and mobility in cities? What are the health effects? And then what actions should public officials instigate in terms of policy directives to change it? So if you're moving in this diagram on the left from the driving forces on the left down to the pressures, the state, the exposure and the response, you can see, for example, that by reducing road traffic in cities and increasing effective public transport, cycling and walking, we are reducing the pressures, we are improving the air quality in the city, we are reducing CO2 emissions, which is important as well, and we are reducing the number of residents that are exposed to these negative conditions that impact on, for example, respiratory diseases, which are much higher in cities than in rural areas. And the effects that can lead to that are very important. The key point is that the actions that we take in terms of intervening as a public policy initiative should occur as high up as possible. So with the driving forces, the pressures rather than with the effects or the actions lower down. And we can come back to this with examples. But let's move on to the next slide. Now, the first example that I'm taking for you is about urban renewal. And you'll see on the photo on the left, one of these modern raised motorways in the CBD of Seoul in South Korea that was championed in the 1960s and constructed. And of course, many buildings were demolished. And the original stream that ran through the city was completely engineered and put in pipes in the ground. The mayor of Seoul decided that this was needed to change. And so you see what has happened in 12 years on the right-hand side. This is a remarkable change. This is an example of the leadership of a mayor in the city that is promoting environmental quality, economic benefits, because all the land values around this development have increased for the property owners, social interaction has increased, and the biological oasis created in this city includes fish in the stream. And the overall outcome is a big improvement on health and quality of life. So this is an example of correcting mistakes from the 60s of modernity, which promoted the kind of infrastructure on the left and coming up with a different response on the right. The next slide, please. Singapore is another interesting example, perhaps more akin to your situation in Vietnam. Let me recall that in the 1950s and 60s, Singapore was a very low-income fishing port. Today, it's one of the leading international hubs in the world. And it has developed an infrastructure of public transport, cycling, walking, green spaces, while creating high-density living. It's a very interesting example. Again, this time, a city-state with a prime minister, a political vision, public policies that are coordinated to promote health and sustainable development in Singapore. And this, again, is an achievement in about 50 years. Let's recall that. So these are very encouraging examples that need to be considered by others to show, yes, we can do something, we can make a difference. So let's move on to the third example, which is one in Europe. Next slide, please. And here we have the example of Stockholm. And Stockholm is a very interesting city, but there are pockets where urban development especially has occurred since 2000 in former industrial zones which were highly polluted. And this particular example is an initiative led by the City Council of Stockholm, not just the mayor. There was a complete commitment to the redevelopment of this very important site on the outskirts of Stockholm. And the example I'm showing here is how road traffic, energy consumption, food production, mobility have all been used to create a sustainable urban neighborhood which promotes health and quality of life. And this particular example is being used as a case to develop others in Sweden in the coming years. So let's move on to the next slide before I conclude. What do all of these processes show? They show that urban governments involves processes and outcomes. And here at the top, we have the business sector, citizens, funders, NGOs, professionals, scientists and policymakers who can be invited to develop collaborative planning processes which are inclusive. They converge, if we go down here the middle, to develop a common vision and then a project for implementation. That requires, on the left, commitment and responsibility, agreements about facts and values, and collective ownership and shared learning. And this is the way forward for urban governments that will promote health and sustainable urban environments. So to conclude, my next slide, I think that we need to rethink the slogan of the 1992 Rio conference, which, as indicated at the top of this slide, says, think globally, act locally. And in my recent book, I said that we need to think and act globally and locally. The last slide, please. For those of you that are interested, I have given 2 final references for you if you want to learn more about this particular work, including my book, Creating Built Environments, which includes the examples and describes them in much more detail than I could present in this very short presentation. I think, to conclude then, that I would like to thank the organisers for giving me the opportunity to share these ideas with you, and I look forward to any questions and answers later in this session. Thank you.
My sincere thanks to Professor Lawrence for the very fascinating presentation. At the moment, we really attract large numbers of participants, 121, which shows that this topic really of great interest. Professor Lawrence's presentation summarizes the key themes in urban planning, innovation, how to promote health and well-being for communities, covering a wide range of fields, environmental, social, medical, how we can reduce noise, pollution, waste emissions. He also provides series of examples about innovative urban governance in different cities around the world, and you also gain access to some important references, as you can see on the slide. Once again, my thanks to Professor Lawrence for his contribution to our first 2 webinars. Now may I invite the next presentation by Professor Vũ Thị Vinh, former Secretary General of ACVN. She will give us an overview of current policies and legal frameworks on urban planning in Vietnam to promote healthy and sustainable living environments for urban residents. Professor Vinh is a former Vice Rector of Hanoi University of Architecture. She has worked in many projects to improve life in poor urban neighborhoods. In 2022, Professor Vinh is honored as one of the 106 outstanding intellectuals in Vietnam. Let's go to her presentation right now. Ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to CAS and the organizing committee, Hussein and University of Hamburg for inviting me to this webinar and allow me to talk about the current policies and legal frameworks in Vietnam on promoting healthy and sustainable living environments for urban residents. This topic is now of great interest to the state and also to the people. I will talk about 5 things in my presentation. First, I will give you an introduction, the problem statement, and then I will give you an overview of the current urban planning system towards a healthy and sustainable living environment. Third, I talk about the role of urban government and stakeholders in the current planning system. Fourth, I talk about some good practices on building healthy and sustainable living environment with the cooperation between urban authorities and communities in Vietnamese cities. And I will give you some examples, some good practices that would be useful as lessons. And then I will have some recommendation for change. First, as you know, in the 14th century in Europe, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, killed many people. And after this pandemic, architects and leaders, they paid more attention to the design of houses, which focus more on well-ventilated and well-lit spaces to improve the living conditions of the people. And in that context, the upgrading and improving the water supply and drainage system also receive attention to eliminate cramped living environments and to replace it with more healthy public spaces. So that was the primary concerns of urban architect at the time. So basically, after every large-scale pandemic, urban construction and development was always promoted with the focus on improving the public health system and community awareness. And this is really crucial for every healthy city, as Professor Lawrence mentioned. According to WHO, a healthy city is a city that continuously creates and improves physical and social environments, allowing people to support one another in fulfilling all life functions and developing to their fullest potential of the community. Professor Lawrence already gives us the 12 criteria of a healthy city. However, during rapid urbanization, this link has been weakened, and we know that cities are huge, complex systems that easily become incubators for viruses. So if we do not have proper design with an idea of a healthy city in mind, we can easily create many trouble for urban citizens. And Vietnam, as you know, is in the process of rapid urbanization. So if urban development is left uncontrolled, it will have big problems on people's lives. And at the moment, the Vietnamese government is paying great attention to urban planning and its connection to public health. So I just give you a very quick introduction. Now I talk about the current urban planning system towards a healthy and towards a healthy living environment in Vietnam. I can talk about urbanization in Vietnam and major orientations of the Vietnam's Communist Party on urban planning. And then I will introduce some difficulties in implementing policies in urban development management. Regarding urbanizations in Vietnam, by 2020, according to Ministry of Civil Construction, the numbers of urban center in the city is 862, including two special cities, which is Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. We can see that we also have almost 700 cities or urban area classified as grade 5, which is considered lowly developed urban areas. So without proper design, the development of almost 700 grade 5 urban area may create many more problems. And at the moment, the urbanization rate in Vietnam is 40%. When we talk about the strengths and weaknesses or the advantages and disadvantages of urbanization in Vietnam, about strengths, Vietnam is a country which is politically stable, and the country is in the process of economic renovation, and the Communist Party and the government do care about people's well-being through a series of policies. The people, they are industrious, they have a spirit of hard work, and at the same time they are active and creative. And clearly improving infrastructure has a positive impact on the living environment, and for that reason it's received a great popular support. In terms of weaknesses, rapid urbanization had a negative impact on the living environment if uncontrolled. For example, cramped housing spaces, traffic jam, flooding, sewage water. Another problem is that the quality of urbanization is in low. The development is mainly in breadth rather than in depth, and this has been pointed out by many. For example, many urban spaces are now being appropriated by different actors. There's also matters of the rich-poor gap, and finally, Vietnam is experiencing serious impact of environmental change and climate change. In terms of opportunity for Vietnam, so Vietnam is rapidly integrating in the world, so the country can learn from other nations. And Vietnam in Southeast Asia, so the country is well connected with other countries. In terms of threats, so in the context of integration, Vietnam also faces competition as well. And then while the demand for investment in urban change is large, but Vietnam still depends a lot on ODA, which is actually decreasing. And another threat, which is the impact of climate change and epidemics and pandemics on people's lives. So I give you an overview of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats regarding urbanization in Vietnam. Now I want to talk briefly about major orientations of the Communist Party and the government concerning how we can develop a healthy urban life in Vietnam. The government has issued many policies on urban planning. For example, in 2003, there was a national action plan on upgrading urban residential blocks. But now I want to focus on two recent documents to demonstrate the attention of the Communist Party and the government to urban planning. First is the resolution number 6, which was promulgated January this year on planning, construction, management, and sustainable development of urban areas in Vietnam by 2030 with a vision to 2045. This is the first time the Politburo issue a resolution that focuses exclusively on urban issues. And for urban planners and for the people, we really find this a welcoming change. The overarching goals of the resolution is to accelerate the speed and improve the quality of urban development in a sustainable way. And second is to improve the quality of life in urban area, ensuring that basic needs of housing and social infrastructure of urban residents is met. So basically, this is the spirit of the resolution. And the resolution also sets some specific targets. For example, by 2025, urbanization rate will be 45%, and by 2030, it should be 50%. The numbers of so the ratio of traffic land to urban construction land will be 11 to 16% in 2025. The green surface area should be between 6 to 8 square meter per person in 2025, and between 8 to 10 square meters per person in 2030. And when we believe if we can do this, it will create a substantial improvements in the living standards of urban citizens. Another document I want to introduce is the National Strategies on Green Growth. In 2012, the government issued the decision 1393 on the strategy of a green lifestyle and sustainable consumption. And in 2018, the Ministries of Construction issued a circular, the circular number 1, which set out the regulations and targets of urban cities. So the circular identified 24 indicators, which are divided into 4 groups. The group 1 includes 5 indicators which evaluate economic growth in relation to the use of natural resources. Group 2 includes 10 indicators which assess the quality of environment and urban landscape. Group 3 include 4 criteria which evaluates the effectiveness of improving the quality and living conditions of urban people, and Group 4 which assess the management of urban government. So which basically means assessment of how effective urban authority have been. So Professor Lawrence mentioned something like this in his presentation, the importance of urban authorities. Now I talk about some difficulties in implementing urban development policies in Vietnam. Policy implementation in Vietnam is always a challenging process because it always affected by many stakeholders and perspective from urban authorities, corporates to communities. And the implementation is also affected by many different policies, and policies sometimes can be misunderstood. Some policy may be in conflict with another policy. And another problem is that the implementation of policy sometimes is up to the interpretation of the authority. So whether they understand the policy correctly, and sometimes the implementation actually differs from the goal of policies. And finally, we have the problem in which policies never cover all the gaps in practice. And so we also need the flexibility in dealing with different situations. But the flexibility also creates its own problem. So if flexibility means diverging from the original goal, then it means that the policy won't be properly implemented. So now I talk about the role of urban government and stakeholders in the current planning system. I will talk about decentralization of local government in Vietnam. Um, and then I talk about the role of urban authority and stakeholders in developing sustainable urbanization towards the improvement of public health. In Vietnam, as you can see, we have central cities under the direct management of the government. Then we have province, and below that we have district and town, provincial district, and then below that we have ward, we have communes, and precinct as well. So out of 862 urban areas in Vietnam, it's important to mention the ACVN, the Association of Vietnamese Cities, which is an organization of municipalities. At the moment, it has a total of 126 members. So there are also big cities, for example, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, Hải Phòng, and Cần Thơ. So all of those cities are part of the ACVN. Regarding the role of urban authorities and stakeholders in planning sustainable urban constructions towards improvement of public health, I must say that urban planning always plays a very important role in sustainable urban development. And we also have to emphasize the responsibility of local authorities in urban planning. And in 2015, the National Assembly of Vietnam promulgated the law on the organization of local governments. In other countries, they may have laws such as urban government, but in Vietnam, it's called the law on organization of local governments. And in this law, there are two chapters, one on local government in the countryside, the other on local government in cities. And I want to talk about two articles. Article 38 talk about the duties and power or authorities of local government in major cities, so the 5 major cities. And then Article 54, which set out the duties and powers of people's councils of town, provincial cities. So basically, local government has the responsibility to decide on urban construction and development planning. So this is a really important role of local government. And second, local government has the responsibility and authority to decide on mechanism and policy to attract investment in urban development. And third, local government also decides the measures, the appropriate measures to manage urban population and to ensure health for urban citizens. So 3 very important duties. And here you can see that, of course, the issues of urban planning is a cross-cutting issue. About the public health system in urban areas, Vietnam community health care policy is the basis for promoting social and economic development in a sustainable way, and this is the consistent view of the Communist Party and the government. We believe that people must be healthy in order to have a prosperous country. At the moment, Vietnam seeks to renovate the health system to ensure equity in order to create favorable opportunity for all people, to ensure that everyone is cared for and protected. And third, we seek to protect and improve community health. And this is the responsibility of the government, but also of every citizen, family, and communities. So this is a shared responsibility between governments and also citizens. So now I want to talk about, to introduce to you some good practices on building healthy living environments with community participations in Vietnam. In recent years, ACVNs cooperate with organizations such as CAS and Uniquita and Canadian Federation of Cities to implement a series of activities to support communities, particularly poor urban community, to improve their living conditions. We want to emphasize in particular the renovation of old apartment blocks. I mentioned earlier that the government has a national action plan for this, but the state budget is limited. We do not always have enough resource in order to renovate deteriorating apartment blocks in Vietnam, and for that reason we seek to get both the government and communities involved. At the moment, Vietnam has a big program for the rural area, which is the new rural development, which really transform the landscape of the countryside. But in cities, we still need more to do in order to transform the urban landscape. And ACVN since 2018, sorry, since 2008 to 2016, we work with urban authorities and people to launch a series of projects to improve living condition in urban city. Here I want to introduce some example. So on the left and below, it's the housing block for low-income people in Vinh City, which is in the central part of Vietnam. And with the support from the local government and community resources, we transform such a shabby blocks into a residential area which is much more stable and convenient, which as you can see, the visible transformation. On your right hand, it's a poor area in Long An City in the south, which is built on some streams and trenches. And so ACVN work with the local authorities to mobilize resources and initiatives. And we encourage the local authorities to create legal framework, the issuance of land use certificate. So the government provide the land use certificate and people provide the resources. And you can see this is how the entire area has been transformed. And as you can see, we even managed to build a playground for the public in this area, which was one very poor and impoverished. And many people, they say they could never dream of such transformation. So now from a very shabby residential area, we now have something very different with electricity supply, clean water, drainage system, toilets, and people actually have household registration, which means that they will be eligible to all services in the city. This picture it was taken from a policy dialogue with National Assembly on affordable housing for residents, and those two they are from the two areas that I showed you earlier. We invited them to this project to have a dialogue with the National Assembly members on the right to affordable housing for poor people, and the contents of this workshop also contributed to the revisions of the law on housing in Vietnam. And we also work with CAS to implement projects to improve living environment. On the left, you see that student primary pupils in Vinh City, they participated in an eco-saving movement. They collect waste. And on the right is a project we work with the Canadian Federation of Cities to develop solid waste processing strategies in Bắc Giang City in order to reduce the areas of landfill. And most recently, we also developed a project on building community-based working spaces or pedestrian spaces. In Vietnam, we received funding from CAS for 3 years, and we conducted research in 6 cities, and then we choose 2 important cities to examine the model of a pedestrian space, because we believe that pedestrian space not only promotes communities' health, but also economic growth as well. And then we conducted pilot studies in Hoàn Kiếm districts of Hanoi and in Hội An Ancient Quarter in Quảng Nam. And by the end of the project, we come up with a guidelines for using or for building pedestrian spaces with community participation in Vietnam. We organize workshops. Dr. Tuấn, my apologies. We experienced some technical problems. Let's move on to the next presentation. Now I talk about some recommendation. Professor Vinh is back. So the management, some recommendation. First, the management of CO2 emissions is an integral part of planning in developed countries. And in the context of climate change, Vietnam is a country that is strongly affected. And for that reason, reducing greenhouse gas emission is an important requirement. And we also need to develop planning for public transport, pedestrians, and bicycles in order to create friendly public spaces for people. So thank you very much, and my gratitude for your attention. My thanks to Professor Ving for the very comprehensive presentation on policies and current legal frameworks on urban governance in Vietnam, resolution number 6, and the national action strategies on green growth. She also emphasized that those policies aim at developing a healthy environment and sustainable urbanization. But in order to do so, we need the cooperation from many stakeholders, city authorities and community and corporations. So once again, my thanks to Professor Ving. Now, may I invite the third speaker, the last of today's webinar, by Professor Phạm Thúy Loan, former Deputy Director of Vietnam Institute of Architecture. She will talk about healthy cities and sustainable development. Professor Loan formerly served as the head of the Department of Urban Planning of HUSE. Professor Loan has worked for many years in the field of urban planning. She understands very well urban designs in Vietnamese cities. And at the moment, Professor Loan is interested in how to Sorry, I think Professor Tuấn is frozen again. Tuấn, we are unable to hear you. Ladies and gentlemen, we must be experiencing another technical problem from HUSE. So allow me to fill in. Now, may I introduce Professor Phạm Thúy Loan. Professor Loan, the floor is yours. My thanks to all of you. Can you hear me? Could you please help me share my slides? Could you please share my slide? To save time, allow me to start right now. First, I wish to thank the organizing committee for this opportunity to share my experiences concerning urban planning and community health in the context of development, planning, and urban governance. Next slide. So I make a slight modification to the title. I will try to look at the planning system and urban development of Vietnam through the perspectives of community health. And this presentation is based on my personal observations as somebody who both study and teach and provide consultancy and policy advocacy services in urban development in Vietnam. So it may be a bit subjective, but I hope that I can provide a bit of an additional perspective. Now I talk about a few things. First, I talk about the global context and the growing concerns about health and well-being. I want to emphasize that Vietnam is part of a global trend. Second, I talk about urban planning and development in Vietnam from the perspective of health and well-being. Third, I talk about emerging actors that matter apart from government and authorities. And fourth, I will have some recommendations what we should do in order to improve health and well-being for the people. For me, this webinar is an important opportunity for me to look back at my whole process of study and practice of urban planning. And we do see lots of gaps and shortcomings in what we have done in terms of urban planning and its connection to communities' health. And this webinar really is an opportunity for us to know what we should do, what we can do better. So about health, health is important to everyone, and we all know that our health depends on our living environment. But sometimes we feel that it's something distant, but actually you see that in only 8 years, 50% of Vietnamese people will live in urban areas, and for that reason, a big task for us is to have a proper planning of urban cities in order to ensure people's health. If you look at the global context after COVID-19, community health is now a major topic of debate, not only in the medical sector, but also in the civil engineering sector. I am impressed by Professor Lawrence's presentation and the 11 criteria of health cities. And I want to add 2 more documents. The first is the UN's SDG published in 2015 with 17 goals. Next slide. I think you're familiar with all the goals of sustainable development, and goal number 3, you can see good health and well-being. But this goal is not independent. The achievement other goals, for example, number 6 on clean water and sanitation will contribute to goal number 3. The achievement of goal number 11, sustainable cities and community, will also contribute to good health. So the important point is that those 17 goals now serve as the guiding principle for countries to develop their policy for development, including in urban planning. And this is really a very important international documents and guidelines. Another important document concerning health and well-being, which is the health and well-being framework of the World WGBC. This document was published in 2020. It emphasized the 6 pillars for health and well-being. We have health protection, the creation of a comfortable environment, the desire for harmony with the natural environment, the lifestyle, the issue of a healthy lifestyle, the issues of social values, and also action for climate change. So those pillars have been converted into detailed benchmarks and principles. And to look at this document, we can see a series of solutions, what we can do in order to create a sustainable built environment, both indoor and outdoor, that can facilitate health. So basically, we have great guidelines at the global level, but then what has been done in Vietnam in terms of urban governance in Vietnam? Next slide. Now I talk a bit about Vietnam, about urban planning and development in Vietnam. I will use the example of Hanoi as our capital and also one of the largest city. There are aspects that we can learn from the realities of urban planning in Hanoi. Next slide. If you look at the internet, you search about the keyword air quality or air pollution, you will have millions of hits about air pollution in Hanoi, and you see that in Hanoi, air quality is always ranked at red or purple level. You know that water and air are two crucial standards of a decent urban life. But then you see that there are many problems with both water and air. In terms of water, many households have to procure their own water purifier. And the same goes for air purifier, as you can look at the slide. Hanoi also faced problems with water pollution and solid waste pollution. And one of the key cause of pollution and one of the situations that have serious impact on people's health has been traffic jams. We gather too many people in the city without the sufficient infrastructure condition to accommodate such a large population. And in Hanoi, we do not have enough public spaces for outdoor exercise. So traffic jam is a major problem, a major cause of air pollution, which affects people's health. In Hanoi, as I mentioned, Hanoi is seriously lacking of public open spaces. The public open spaces in Hanoi has decreased over time. The reason is simple. We have the stable amount of public open spaces, while we have more and more people all the time, and public spaces are often converted into apartment blocks. And at the moment, we have roughly less than 1 square meter per person, less than 1 square meters of public open space per person in Hanoi. So basically, Hanoi lacks the essential criteria to ensure decent public health for our citizens. According to the resolution 6 that Professor Ving mentioned, we have very high targets. We aim to have 8 square meters of public open space per person. But now, as I mentioned, we only have roughly 1 square meters per person. And then we also have the problem of access to public spaces. As you can see, only the zones that are covered in dark brown is where people have good access to public spaces. When we survey the importance of public open spaces to people's health, you see the green and blue chart, which demonstrate those who responded as seriously lacking or lacking. So people are asked to what extent we need more open spaces, and then most people say that we're still lacking open public spaces. Next slide, please. Next slide. And we also see we see that Hanoi has several problems for why air pollution, traffic jam, and the lack of public open spaces and green spaces. The issues have been in existence in Hanoi for a long time, but what has been done to address those problems? This is the master plan of Hanoi, which was published 10 years ago. Many people were impressed by this plan when it was first introduced, and many people believe that this plan would bring Hanoi to a new level of development. This master plan, however, is under revision, which is a sign that this plan, the implementation of this plan has been very slow. For example, this plan includes the setting up of satellite city, but at the moment there's no such satellite cities being fully developed. It means that everyone are being gathered in the core centers of Hanoi, 8 million people. So I want to emphasize a huge gap between public discourses on planning and the actual implementation of planning. In public discourses on planning, there have been nice targets on GDP growth, on the areas of public spaces per capita, and etc. So there are two problems with those public discourses. First, those discourses focus too much on economic growth than on social and environmental problems. And then another problem is that when we talk about the need to deal with a social environmental problem, we often talk more than what we do. So for example, one emphasis in the master plan is that we will try to reduce the population density in core central areas of Hanoi. But what we do is the opposite, which is the fact that we are building more and more apartment blocks right in the center of the city without any proper investment in infrastructure. And for that reason, we actually packing more people at city center. And this is not Hanoi is not an exception. We see that in Vietnam, urban planning has been very much pro-development without sufficient attention to environment, social issues, and health. Issues of conditions of life and environment have received much less attention. This is an example. We have a policy to relocate factories from inner city to outer part of the city. And then the original plan is that the factory should be converted into public open spaces for everyone. But actually, when a factory is relocated to the outer city, it will immediately be converted into a commercial apartment block. There's no time. So, but this, I try to emphasize that we miss many opportunities. But one thing to emphasize is that in our planning, urban planning system, because we're always pro-development, and certainly pro-development to some extent has been effective in some aspects. So for example, some private corporations, they actually develop decent urban areas, but those are quite exception. At the same time, we have many kind of examples showing poor urban planning. On the left, you see the Eco Park as a right example. On the right, you see one of many examples of poor urban planning. which results in very impoverished and poorly developed residential area where people lack basic urban amenities. And there will be substantial gaps between different rich poor groups. And now another example, when I talk about pro-development, I want to say that in Vietnam, we are very quick to develop new expensive apartment blocks, but we have been very slow to renovate deteriorating old style apartment blocks. So my observation to sum up is that our planning discourses has focused too much on economic growth and the exploitation of the resources from land, while we pay less attention to issues such as air quality and health. We have a planning system that has been driven by the market, which continues to expand the gap between the rich and the poor. Our urban planning is also land exploitative, which is not sustainable. And when I look at our policies and legal documents, I believe that the words health and well-being do not appear frequently in legal documents, which means that insufficient has been paid to issues of health and well-being. And furthermore, we do not have technical guidance and standards about what kind of criteria are needed to ensure proper health condition for people. My conclusion is that public health and well-being has not received sufficient attention in programs and policies and actions of the construction industries in Vietnam. Issues such as social equality and inclusiveness have been neglected. We do not have proper solution to support the vulnerable people, those who are unable to pay for housing and other urban services. People may think that people may assume that I do not give enough credit to the official sector in creating a healthy environment to the people. But at the same time, I want to credit some emerging actors. So there's some organizations, private organizations that are playing an active role. So next slide, one example is an international organization, which is Health Bridge. So next slide. Health Bridge is an NGO, an international NGO based in Canada with a global outreach, and they partner with many organizations to help communities to achieve better health condition in Vietnam. Health Bridge focuses on healthy cities. Next slide. And in this program promoted by Health Bridge, it focuses on three things. The first is to develop green vehicles and green forms of transport. Second, the development of access to public spaces. And third, the improvement of traditional markets to ensure livelihoods for everyone. So all of these areas of action actually bring very concrete benefits to local communities. So this is a project where they renovate the cycling system in Hoi An, the development of a master plan for Hoi An. Each project of this kind requires 3 to 5 years of sustained action. But as you can see, that these projects actually kind of inspire the motivation for change from many other actors. Another emerging actor, I think, to invite this organization, Think Playground, to make a speech at the first webinar. Think Playground focuses on the right to play of children as a way of improving children's physical and mental health. And so they do make an impact. And another actor, which is the Network for Hanoi Worthy of Living. So it gathers volunteers from all walks of life in Hanoi. We mobilize resources to transform Hanoi into a city worthy of living. So a city where we walk more frequently, we have more public spaces, and we have more clean air. So this network launched a series of initiatives. For example, we convert a dumping ground on the bank of the Red River into a park, into a garden. And then we managed to gather international organizations, local authorities, volunteer groups. And of course, I confirm that local authorities have been very supportive. And those projects demonstrate the message of Professor Lawrence that about the concept of co-benefits. So when we talk about co-benefits, we cannot rely on a single actor. For example, the government. It's important that we open opportunities for other groups in the society. They only require political endorsement from the government in order to jump in. And I see that in Hanoi and in Vietnam. I think the questions of health now receive substantial attention from different actors who are willing to work with the state, with the government, to create healthy spaces. But one more thing, that we won't be able to deal with the health question comprehensively. We also need to mobilize more coordinated efforts. Now we have more actors. The question is how to coordinate them. So for example, the health sector, civil engineering sector, the environmental sector, everyone can contribute to ensuring decent health for people. In order to do that, we need several things. First, we need to look at the same way. Second, everyone should consider health as a key priority in urban planning. At the moment in Vietnam, everyone is building new master plan for urban planning. This is actually an opportunity. If we mainstream health issues in urban plan, it would be very effective. And for example, it's important to incorporate element on green growth, social equity, people's participation, etc. So the issues of health should be placed at the central in Vietnam's development policy, and this can only be done by the coordination of different actors. Another recommendation is that we need to develop technical guidelines and standards for urban planning so as we can transform policy into concrete actions. We do have the policies, but we need the tool, the technical tool, to transform those policies into concrete standardized actions. There are two things that should be done. First is that we should make it mandatory for new urban construction project is to ensure that each project must dedicate a space for pedestrian streets. At the moment, we're developing a set of criteria for green cities or green environment. So we are emphasizing criteria such as cycling street or pedestrian street. So we want to make those criteria mandatory and essential. Another point, we know that when we deal with issue of environment and so forth, so environmental issue must be mainstream in any urban planning master plan as an essential component. I think we need a change of mindset. We should not miss any opportunities. It's important that we utilize all opportunities to improve people's health and well-being. Thank you for your attention. My thanks to Professor Thủy Loan on issues of people's health and well-being. This is actually an issue of global concern. She used examples of Hanoi, highlighting issues such as air pollution, traffic jam, and the lack of public green spaces. She also emphasized the role of social organizations such as Health Bridge and Think Playground and what they have done to improve people's health. And she also emphasized the importance of creating technical guidelines for developing a green living environment. Once again, I want to thank all speakers for your presentations. Now it's time for our Q&A session. Allow me to note that sorry, allow me to make a request. Could you please turn on your camera so that we can take a photo session of to commemorate this webinar? Could you please turn on your camera? Could you please turn on your camera so that we can take a group photo? We have roughly 150 participants online, which is a great encouragement to us, the organizers. One, two, and three. Thank you very much for your support. Now let's go to the Q&A session. The Q&A session will be coordinated by Dr. Nguyễn Thu Thủy, a technical advisor of the HOPE project from University of Hamburg. Dr. Thủy, the floor is yours. Thank you, Dr. Tuấn. Are you sharing the screen or should I be sharing the screen? So, okay, I will go ahead. So we're experiencing some internet problem in Vietnam at the moment. Now allow me to continue with the Q&A session. According to the agenda, we have 1 hour, but actually we are a bit behind schedule. So may I suggest that we will spend only 30 minutes on the Q&A. In the presentation, we have learned a lot from our speakers. So we will focus more. We will give a bit more time to two panelists who come from state organizations and also local authorities. So let's continue to discuss issues such as the role of urban planning and its impact on people's health, the role of local authorities in urban planning, and so forth. And we will listen to sharings of our panelists on practical recommendations to improve the urban governance in Vietnam. Now allow me to introduce the panelists. Apart from the three keynote speakers, Professor Roderick Lawrence, Professor Vũ Thị Vinh, and Professor Phạm Thúy Loan, we are pleased to welcome two more. From state agency, Dr. Tạ Quốc Thắng, from the Departments of Planning and Architecture, Ministry of Civil Construction. He is the secretary to the Monitoring Commission of Vietnam on ASEAN Architectural Services. He has implemented a series of urban planning projects, and he also prolific writers on green growth. Another panelist is Mr. Lê Sĩ Chiến, Vice Chairman of the People's Committee of Vinh, city of Nghệ An Province in central Vietnam. He's also directly in charge of urban planning. He also served many important positions, and he participates actively in the development, in the urban development of the city of Vinh, for example, the organization of public spaces and the improvement of safety in public transport. So once again, I wish to thank all of you for your time and for contributing your insights and experiences with us. Now to begin the Q&A session, may I invite Mr. Tạ Quốc Thắng to talk a bit about, to make some comments about what has been shared so far, and can you give us some updates on the policies of urban governance in Vietnam, which may have an impact on people's health? And I want you also to reflect on challenges to the implementation of those policies. Greetings to all of you. And thank you, Thuy, for the introduction. Can you hear me? And good afternoon to all of you, Vinh and Loan. So I have only some comments, and I certainly won't be able to cover everything concerning regulation and policies on urban planning and health issues in Vietnam. I think previous speaker, for example, Professor Vinh, already gave a very comprehensive overview on policy, so I won't repeat what has been said. Concerning urban planning policies and the preservation of health conditions for people in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, we often use the term urban development management. Basically, it implies what we mean by urban planning. So allow me to give you an overview on the current policies, the essential policy in urban planning that may have a direct impact on health condition of urban citizens. As Luan say, when we talk about health and well-being, such words do not appear frequently in legal policies in civil engineering and construction and architecture in Vietnam. So we have few mentioning, we do not regularly mention those words such as health and well-being. So through my review, I think such issue, the issues of health, is most frequently mentioned in the technical guidelines on infrastructure, for example, how to build the sewage system or etc. And then we also have a system, we have a requirement. So whenever a project is being designed, we need to collect feedback from local community. And then that is where we often gather information on health needs of local community. So in Vietnam, in terms of urban planning, we often talk about services, the provisions of basic services for urban citizens. We talk about market, basic amenities. We also talk about so those are kind of essential basic needs. And then there's another kind of services that involve cultural and entertainment, life, social interaction. The third group of services involves social equity. So there are three groups of services that we are expected to provide to urban citizens: basic essential needs, and then cultural and entertainment needs, and then we also have, we normally pay attention in particular to services that seek to ensure both cultural needs and also the needs for social equity. And it is actually in documents that talk about those services that I find the issue of health being mentioned most frequently. For example, those documents often mention the requirements of ensuring access to public green spaces, the dedications of public land to parks, to pedestrian area. So when we look at policy documents, I think Madam Vinh already say a lot. I want to repeat just some. For example, in law and in decrees, there are also regulations concerning the mandatory inclusions of those spaces in any urban building projects. There's also standards, building standards that set the regulations. For example, the average area, green area per capita. So there are, of course, standards and regulations that that set the minimal criteria for health and well-being. There's also regulations on the how many public meeting spaces, or in Vietnam we call it cultural houses, which means the meeting places of local communities. So there are regulations as to how many cultural houses that should be built for a certain numbers of population. There are also other regulations that seek to address the issue of health indirectly. For example, we have a standards for apartment blocks. So there are standards of apartment blocks. So when an apartment block is built, there should be a room for public meeting. There should be, for example, pathway for people with disability or the older person, etc. There are also some documents that have a bit of more of a cross-cutting impact. For example, other speakers already mentioned some resolution by the state. For example, recently the Politburo issued a resolution number 37, etc. And recently we have another resolution called the resolution number 11. And in the past we have resolution number 21. So those resolutions are designed for different regions. So for example, in each region, the Red River Delta, the Mekong River Delta, and then for each region, the government issue a specific resolution in order to take into account the specific needs of such region. For example, the Mekong River Delta is heavily influenced by climate change, and then there is a resolution specifically designed for that region in order to take into account what should be provided to urban citizens under the context of climate change. So climate change is kind of a cross-cutting issue. So almost in every single new project of urban construction, the issue of climate change is always included as a factor to be considered seriously. Now I talk about architecture. So in recent years, in Vietnam, there are emerging trends in architecture. For example, green architecture, green buildings is now quite common in Vietnam. Regarding the policies in this matter, I don't think we have quite clear policies and guidance for green growth and green architecture in Vietnam, although there has been some level of attention from state authorities. For example, in terms of green infrastructure or green buildings, we have some guidelines for green building. We have the guideline number 9 on friendly building materials, environmentally friendly building materials, and the policy for the encouragement or for the promotion of the markets for environmentally friendly building materials, and then some policies to give preferential treatment to corporations that seek to develop green buildings. So to sum up, now I agree with Luan that when we look at the discourses on on urban planning in Vietnam, I think the discourses at the moment are merely discourses, which means that those discourses are there, but they have not been really converted into actual actions. They have not been fully implemented. We have policies, but we have not done enough to implement those policies. And at the moment, those are actually the biggest problems. An example, for example, as you see in Vietnam, we have master plan, but a major problem with master plan is that they are constantly being revised. So in this sense, we do have a vision or a discourse about reducing population density in the urban core, but then we revise the master plan in order to put more apartment blocks at the city center, which actually is very much at odds with the aims in the master plan. And then for that reason, recently the Prime Minister issued a new directive that emphasized the need to ensure that master plan is respected and properly followed. And then this directive is now being enforced. And I think the directive does make an impact which visibly reduce the numbers of revisions of master plan. There are also other challenges, for example, the green spaces in urban areas. A while ago, I wrote an article on urban spaces, and this is really a burning and thorny issues in urban planning in Vietnam. For example, in Vietnamese cities, parks are poorly managed because parks in Vietnam, they are mostly managed by state agencies. So basically, there's no resource for maintenance and renovation. And as a result, most parks in Vietnam have deteriorated substantially. They are in a very poor condition at the moment because most parks in Vietnam operate or manage in accordance with a non-profit principle. And so the state agency managing those parks, they are unable to raise any fund for the maintenance and renovation of parks. And for that reason, parks that are managed by state agency are often in very poor condition, in contrast to parks that are managed by private developers and private corporation. So one major question is how can we mobilize the resources and funding for parks maintenance, for the maintenance and renovation of green spaces? Another issue is the issues of cultural buildings and cultural architecture. So in Vietnam, we have many buildings that are dedicated to cultural purposes, but many buildings are not fully utilized. They are often left idle and then rarely used or used, but not to their full potential. Many of the cultural houses are left unused. Many communities, they do not want to use their cultural houses for public purposes. And many cultural houses are actually locked and they also deteriorate substantially, and they do not fulfill their mission, which is to create a good public space for improving the mental health of the citizens. Another So again, back to the issue of developing urban green spaces. We also face some problem, for example, community awareness. So for example, when we build a new apartment block, neither the private developers nor the communities, the resident community, actually pay attention to green spaces. People just want to have a house and to maximize the housing floor space at the expense of the space dedicated to public green areas for public entertainment. So I have briefly summarized the key issues concerning both policies for urban planning and architecture in Vietnam, which have a direct impact on health and well-being of urban citizens. So within a very limited amount of time, I won't be able to give you more details. I just want to give you some overview. As for recommendation, I think others have raised a very good recommendation actually. And then recommendations are of course being considered because we're still wondering which solution would work best in the Vietnamese context. And then that is another question we need to deal with. Thank you, Mr. Tang, for giving us a very comprehensive overview of current policies of the Vietnamese government, which may have an impact on the promotion of green cities and healthy urban living environments in Vietnam. Keywords I take from your presentation is implementation. So according to previous speakers, as well as through Mr. Tang presentation, we learned that in Vietnam, we have many policies, many commitments, but the implementation of those policy discourses and commitment has been below expectation. So I think you mentioned something, which is the involvement of the private sector. I think you highlights the capacity of the private sector to do better in terms of the implementation of urban planning policies. So I think that may be a good orientation for future urban planning projects and programs. Now, may I invite Mr. Lê Sĩ Chiến, the Vice Chairman of the People's Committee of Vinh City, to share with us from the perspective of an urban manager in Vietnam. Vinh, we know, is a very large city, and in Vietnam it's classified as Grade 1. And we look forward to your experiences, please. Greetings to all of you. First, I wish to thank the organizing committee for inviting us to this workshop, to this webinar, and then the topic is fascinating, which really connects to our daily work. And so today, in this room, there's not only me, but all architects in our city office for architecture. We invite all architects here in order to give them the opportunity to learn from international experts. So after listening to the presentation and the sharings of experiences from different backgrounds, we really see that urban planning may have a direct impact on the health and well-being of urban citizens. This is natural, because when we talk about health and well-being, which involves physical, cultural, and social well-being, it is very clear that the way we manage our urban design and planning will have a direct impact on our life. We understand that very well. But then sometimes from our experiences, we sometimes have to make a compromise because we are unable to achieve on those ideal goals. Let me give you an example. So for example, to facilitate transport and mobility, we're supposed to build a road connecting one area to another. But then when people build their homes, their houses, they're interested in things such as lighting and the direction of the flows of winds. And then people complain that, for example, if we build a road like this, which may facilitate mobility, but which may open, which may expose their homes to heat and also to what they call negative flows of winds, and then people may have a different idea about the direction of certain roads. Another example is that normally we would prefer places that are less crowded, but then we also have to balance between population density and economic growth. For example, the more crowded a neighborhood is, we will have less space for green space, but at the same time, people will have more livelihood opportunity. They can make more money from trade, from employment. So we always have to struggle to balance the relationship between public welfare and at the same time economic opportunities. It goes the same for land utilization. So for example, if we utilize more land in a more intensive way, it also brings us more economic benefits. But at the same time, we won't be able to have enough public green spaces for people. So from our experiences, I think when we develop urban planning in Vietnam, we always have to take a balanced view. We cannot prioritize one thing over another. We cannot prioritize economic growth over health, and not the other way around. We always have to have a balanced approach. And I think the state have very clear policies and guidelines and standards. So for example, in terms of the minimum area, the amounts of public space per capita, in Vietnamese public policies, there's always the minimum and the maximum level. And so I think we do have a room for compromise, which is we can choose something in between in order to have a balance between health and economic growth and economic value. We also observe the situation mentioned by the previous speaker, which is that public spaces managed by state agency are often in worse condition than public spaces managed by private corporation. For example, our parks often become dumping grounds, and then many people, they encroach upon public spaces for their private trading businesses. And then most parks that are managed by state agencies are in that situation. So I think we should decentralize or privatize the management of public spaces. We should get the private sector involved more extensively, because I feel that the private sector, they are more capable at running on managing public spaces in Vietnam. Just for your information, recently in Vinh City, there are some changes which may have a positive impact on people's health, which are based on community participation. In Madame Ving's presentation, she also mentioned old style apartment block in Vinh City. So recently we managed to transform many of those apartment blocks into more renovated residential area, mostly thanks to community-based resources. And now we try to have one garden for each apartment block or residential area. And so we're trying to mobilize the contribution of local communities to build those gardens. We're also mobilizing people to donate their land in order to build larger roads within residential area. Previously, in many of our residential area, the inner roads are very small and narrow, which are unable to accommodate cars and trucks. But now we are encouraging local households to donate their land so that to expand inner roads to facilitate mobility. And many people are really supportive of this initiative. So I just want to say, to share with you a few experiences and comments, and thank you for this opportunity. My thanks to Dr. Chien for sharing very practical experiences with us, which really reflect both problems and emerging opportunities in urban plannings in Vietnam. We do see lots of good news and promising changes. So, for example, your success in renovating many old-style apartment blocks in the city of Vinh, and I think Madame Vinh also gave us an example about about shabby, deteriorating apartment blocks, which have really serious impact on people's health and well-being. And then the renovation of such area has been a welcoming change. So basically, we still face many challenges in urban planning. Mr. Chien mentions the paradox or the conflict between, for example, population density and economic growth. Sometimes we actually need to accommodate more cramped space in exchange for more livelihood opportunities. And I think maybe we want you to come back to us in the next webinar when we talk more specifically about urban design. How can we balance between economic opportunities and also urban public services? So we listened to 3 presentations and also the comments by panelists. We see issues that are cross-cutting, for example, improving the effectiveness of urban management. For example, how local authority manage urban planning and urban design. How can we make sure that policies and implementation go side by side? How can we ensure co-benefits, meanings that everyone will have a gain from urban planning? Of course, we need to balance between different sets of values, for example, environmental, social, and commercial gains. And so it's so important that we have solutions that can harmonize different gains and different purposes in order to create benefits for everyone. We also discuss a solution in order to promote initiatives that have shown the potential to improve urban life. We talk about factors, for example, political commitment, public adhesion or cohesion, leadership, technologies, as well as the contribution of NGO and CSO. So those are some of the keywords that I have gathered. So before we wrap up, once again, may I ask all the 5 speakers, each of you, can each of you share with us 3 keywords that you want to use as recommendations? If you want to recommend something to improve urban planning for Vietnam to achieve the goal of healthy city, I want you to share with us, each of you, 3 keywords. What should be done in order to improve urban planning for healthier city in Vietnam? Now, first, may I invite Professor Lawrence, please?
Well, thank you, Chair. I think we need reform in education for architecture and planning, because this is completely absent the things that we've been discussing here today about health and well-being. They are not taught. So this is why many architects and planners are not treating them in their daily work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating issue. I do believe that education matters, and we unfortunately do not have the time to discuss it today. This is a fascinating issue. I think we will return to this in later webinar. Professor Vinh, some keywords or recommendation which may help us improve healthier cities. Thank you, Chair. So in order to develop sustainable, healthy cities and improve community well-being, the keywords that I have in mind, in order to have good implementation, we need political commitment and community participation. Political commitment and community participation. By political commitment, I mean the leaders' commitment and the support from the community. 2 things. Thank you. Very important. Political commitment and community participation. Professor Luan. I'm sorry, she's not, the microphone is off. Thank you for the question. Good but difficult question. I think there are 3 keywords. Awareness. There are many dimensions to awareness. First, we must understand the importance of the impact of good environment on good health. Second, there are the awareness that so the awareness is the first thing. Second word, co-action. We cannot rely on any single actor to deal with this issue. We need community, we need intersectoral cooperation. The third keyword, integration. So sometimes we have conflicts between our approaches and actions. So without integration, we won't be able to achieve our goal. For example, a car may be in conflict with pedestrians. So we need to integrate solutions for cars and solutions for pedestrians. Thank you. Thank you, Luan. So you say keywords, the simple words, but actually it requires lots of actions and efforts. But indeed, your keywords are guiding principle for us. Now, Mr. Tang, please. Could you share with us some keyword as well? So again, I agree that this is a big question and tough question. I often pay attention to microeconomic, microscopic issue rather than those macroeconomic things. But if I have to choose three terms, first, I want to emphasize green space. That is the top priority for any urban planning project that seeks to improve people's health. First, green space. Second, cultural infrastructure. Infrastructure for cultural purposes. So another sector which may help us balance the biological and physical needs and mental needs of people. Third, decentralization and socialization, or privatization, basically, which means that we need to give the society a role, the private sector a role. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Chien. And fascinating question. So for us at the moment, we need first mechanism to enhance the participation of the private sector and communities in city management. There are more to come, but I think for now, I just want to mention that. Thank you very much. So indeed, we know that we see that all the five speakers have given us many keywords, and if you look closely, their keywords actually interconnected. They all focus on aspects such as participation, inclusiveness, coordination, mechanism, socialization, co-action, awareness, integration. So all the keywords really reflect the trends and the requirements, the standards for good, inclusive urban management and planning. So allow me to conclude the Q&A session today. Now I return the floor to the chair, Mr. Tuan, and thank you very much for all panelists for joining me. Thank you, Dr. Thuy, for your coordination. I think we are a bit out of time, And so this is a sign that the webinar has been a good success. Allow me to say a few words to wrap up. Ladies and gentlemen, the second webinar of the HOPE project on health governance to promote inclusive urban planning approaches targeting the quality of life for citizens in Vietnam, co-organized by CCSB-VN, CAS, and Hamburg University, has been a great success. At some particular moment, we have 170 participants. We wish to thank all the speakers, Professor Lawrence, Professor Vinh, Professor Luan, for comprehensive and valuable presentations on urban health in the context of rapid urbanization in Vietnam. One of the key issue in global development and also in Vietnam is the promotion of green growth in Vietnamese cities. And in order to do that, we need strategy and coordination between many actors, city planners, local authorities, communities, and NGOs. We particularly emphasize public participations. I wish to thank also the panelists, Mr. Tạ Quốc Thắng and Mr. Lê Sĩ Chiến, for contributing your valuable experiences concerning urban planning and management in Vietnam. We also want to thank CAS and the program manager Vũ Thị Thu Phương. My thanks to Dr. Michael Weibo, Dr. Nguyễn Thị Thu Thủy, Hamburg University, Dr. Phạm Hải Hà, Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Dr. Nguyễn Thị Thánh Phương, and Madam Lê Thị Thùy Linh. Thank you all for organizing this event. I thank the international office from HUSE for sponsoring this event. I also wish to thank all of you. Your participation is the crucial factor that lead to the success of this webinar. I also wish to thank representative from central and local agencies, Vietnam Energy Network, Madam Trần Thị Thu Phương, and the participations of everyone. I thank all the technical team for ensuring that we have all the technical conditions to organize this event. The HOPE project look forward to your support in the coming years in order to disseminate the message, which is the importance of health-oriented policies, and it's important to the well-being of urban citizens. I look forward to seeing you again in future HOPE webinar. I wish you a good health and success. Thank you very much and see you again.